familiar land to many of us. Also an ever-changing place that somehow never fully loses its identity. Hyrule is of course not the only place known to exist in the Zelda universe, as we know of several others such as Hytopia, Termina and more. Still, Hyrule always seems to be the most prominent among them. But what came before Hyrule and even before the Hylians, as we know them? Well, the further we go back, the more complicated it gets. But before we get into that, hello my lovelies, welcome to my channel! I'm just a game lore channel called Just A, my second video ever. Wow, you really like the fourth timeline theory. I was gonna make 100 subscriber special, then it became 200 before I could even work on any, and since the number keeps on reaching new milestones, I decided the best thing I can do to thank you is make more videos. So, thank you 1,000 times, it means a lot to me. Part 2 to the fourth timeline is coming eventually, but it will take some time, so here's a video with a somewhat related topic. And this is actually a video some of you voted for in a way. In the poll, this topic was called Civilization before Hylians, which is actually the main point of this video. What came before Hylians, or rather the Hylians we know of, and why did it become that way? Why is the current Hyrule so different? Now, we will look at what came before any Hylians too, but I do mean the modern Hylians in specific, the ones we get to see in-game. That doesn't count Hylians that came before any of that. I suppose we can call those ancient Hylians, so it's basically what came before modern Hylians. Unfortunately, it took longer than expected to make this video. Tons of things coming up unexpectedly and a big health scare, but it's here now and I hope you enjoy. If you want more info about the plans for this channel, I will talk about it at the end of the video. Fair warning, there will be some slight Tears of the Kingdom spoilers here. Nothing big like endgame related things, far from that, but it will have to do with a little bit of lore shown in-game, and I will mention whenever it comes up, so you can skip ahead a bit if you like. Now, to answer the question if Hyrule is a post-apocalyptic civilization, we have to look at what came before said apocalypse. Let me take you on a little journey. Hyrule is in this everlasting pseudo-medieval state. By that I mean that the way its society works is not quite medieval, and it also leaves room for modern bits and pieces, but all in all it still revolves around the medieval themes of castles, royalty, knights, often religious lore, and of course the fight over power. Good versus evil, God and his people against the devil and his demons. Some incarnations of Hyrule seem quite advanced, while some barely are. Of course, we look at the Hyrule of a different era in each game, and looking at our world history, the further we go back, the less advanced we get. But what about Hyrule? The further we go back, the opposite becomes clear. At the furthest point we can go to, which is set in the past of Skyward Sword, we have something quite significant. Technology. The ancient robots. It is said that they were created by an ancient civilization. Interesting how at the furthest point within the history of Zelda, we have more advanced technology than at any midpoints. We also have industrial facilities, showing that all this technology was actively used in a fully realized environment. But not only that, by the time Skyward Sword happens, a lot of it has fallen into disrepair because its heyday was many years ago. That means the creation of these can date back far more than we can even think of. We just know this technology existed during the time of Hylia, but even that doesn't specify anything about when it was created. You might still wonder, how does it relate to the topic of this video? Well, let me explain. No matter how far we go back in the history of Hyrule, there will always be more advanced civilizations that got wiped out or are barely present because of some cataclysmic event. And somehow these ancient people were far more advanced than the current ones we see in each game. So what if Hyrule is built upon the ruins of a massively modern and advanced civilization? Perhaps our civilization, or one that can be compared to it? It brings up the question, what came before the Hylians that we know of? And what about the people that came before them? To try and make sense of this notion, we have to look at the recorded history of Hyrule once more. Way before time itself existed, the universe was in chaos. It was when the golden goddesses descended upon it that order was brought to existence. The realm of Hyrule was created using the power of Deen, the courage of Feror, and the wisdom of Nehru. And once they had finished, they left their newly created land behind with an artifact that represents the essence of their power, the Triforce. They entrusted the goddess Hylia with the Triforce, as it held a power that was far too great and could easily fall into the wrong hands if not protected. That brought upon the era of Hylia. She ruled over the races living on the surface, and it was seemingly an era of peace. A prominent race in this era is the race of the Hylians. In most aspects they look human, except for their long pointy elf ears. It is said that these pointy ears allow them to hear messages from the gods. The ancient robots also existed at this time. Also notable are the Sheikah, who were direct servants to the goddess Hylia. As harmonic as this time was, it was not to last. Someday the ground cracked and an army of demons appeared, led by the demon king Demise. He wanted to take the Triforce for his own and rule over this world, and so he commanded his army to destroy everything in their path, causing a lot of bloodshed. The ancient battle in which all of the races fought was in full swing. Fearing for her people, Hylia gathered the surviving Hylians and placed them onto a mass of land that she would send into the sky, far out of Demise's reach. This would become Skyloft. Hylia then joined the remaining races in battle against Demise. The horrifying battle ended with Demise being sealed into a prison at the site where Skyloft used to be. Hylia herself was injured beyond saving during this war and decided to have herself be reincarnated into a mortal form, as deities cannot use the power of the Triforce, but mortals can. Yet before that she appointed various guardians and helpers and left clues for her own reincarnation and her chosen hero, as she knew Demise could not be contained forever. She left the world and was reborn as Zelda. Her best friend and, let's be real, implied lover, named Link, would become Hylia's chosen hero. Then the events of Skyward Sword play out, and after that, it seems that the Hylians decided to settle on the ground, possibly led by Zelda and Link. The world they decided to settle on was still quite broken, and they had to rebuild it. The Kingdom of Hyrule is then established an unspecified time after that. That is when it gets tricky. Fair warning, I will mention a Tears of the Kingdom story spoiler here. Now, how exactly the Kingdom of Hyrule was founded is unclear, but we know it was created out of the union of a Zonai man and a Hylian woman, according to Tears of the Kingdom. But does this really happen after Skyward Sword's full story, or is this perhaps on another timeline? Well, I can say this much. We will look into that when I do the sequel to my 4th timeline video. It will take far too much time to talk about this now. That's not the point of this video anyway, as the founding of Hyrule as a kingdom ends this section. So we have the Kingdom of Hyrule, and everything seen in most Zelda games happens now. But this little trip is going to take you on a loop, because we have to go back to the start once more. We have no idea how long the era of Hylia lasted, and if it even was exactly as described. In fact, I'm not sure we even know when exactly the goddesses left the world and when the Triforce was transferred into Hylia's care. This era could have been hundreds to thousands, if not even millions or billions of years long. And it is important to mention that the story I told you is quite religious. I mean, of course it is. We have gods and demons, but I actually mean the way in which it deals with the creation of the world and life itself. Looking at the Bible, for example, the world was created within 7 days. Humans came to be with Adam and Eve, and the story of Hyrule's creation is quite similar. The world was made through Hyrule's version of a holy trinity, and life on it just somehow came to be. But did it really have to happen in this short process? We know that our life and our world came to be in a long process. People of biblical times were simply not around to have a clue about how it happened. But that's when we have to differentiate between our religions and the religions seen in Zelda games. Our religions are about belief. We can find proof of it being real in things that are subjective to us. They prove it to us, but not in the grander scale of things. Now, let's look at religion in Hyrule. We do have definite proof of religion being based off of actual facts, actual happenings and actual existing deities. But did everything they do really happen in a way that is written down in history? Well, the only one who might know is Hylia, as she was the only one who stuck around with the mortals after the golden goddesses had left. But since she isn't present in a reachable state, we are stuck with those writings. But that makes me wonder, if the era of Hylia was so very long, what if the humans in that era managed to develop in a very advanced stage? After all, there was no threat to really hinder the development, at least none that we know of. If the people of that era were anything like us, maybe they had wars with themselves, but it didn't exactly hinder our development. But then, boom! The apocalypse, a cataclysmic event, destroyed everything. Likely the emergence of Demise was that exact apocalypse. The survivors were perhaps far too few to successfully continue the knowledge of the past, and so it was lost over the generations. With the Skyloftians, that doesn't seem far off due to their isolation. Yet what exactly do we know about this lost advanced civilization? Well, not that much if going by what is outright stated, but the subtext is strong within the visuals. For this section, I'm going to reference a certain article a lot. It's called Ancient Cultures of Lanayru Desert by Talbot Hook. A really well-researched article that goes into real-world influences. I will link the website with the article in the description. Definitely recommend checking it out. There is a reason why we are using the Lanayru Desert as a main focus here. In a metaphorical way, it does represent our world and our future, potentially. What was once a lush green landscape became an unfriendly desert. The people of then mined their land until all resources were exhausted and the environment was totally ruined. A lot of what once represented an age of advancement remains buried under the sand. But from what we can see, the technology that was once active there was held in high regard. You can see the robots being present in the art and architectural design of the area, almost as if they were worshipped in a way. If we look at our own ancient cultures, it makes sense. In ancient Greek mythology, but also in Hinduism, really any multi-theistic religion, there are deities that represent the things of the daily life. Look at the Roman goddess of the oven, Fornax. Things like that. And while some multi-theistic religions died out, several are of course still present. Here the robots represented what the ancient civilization valued: advancement, progress, trade, business, all of that. What plays into that idea quite nicely is the fact that we seem to have Mesoamerican influences in the colors and designs shown in the architecture of the Lanayru facilities. But not only that, but the source of inspiration for the design of the robots themselves is also from a multi-theistic culture. They seem similar to dogu, which are small statues from traditional Japanese culture dating back to the country's prehistoric Jomon period. They appear to be shaped after humans and also after animals, but in general their shape is often quite feminine. It is believed that they might have had a godly role, something of the likes of a mother goddess. Why I mention this and the Mesoamerican influence is that it plays into the idea that the technology might have been worshipped like deities, that, like the dogu, they became a product of humanity but also a source of worship and belief. The cultures that inspired these things were multitheistic, worshipping gods that carried aspects of life and death, of the things that surrounded the people. And if we look at what the robots themselves tell us, we know that they were mass-produced, industrialized. Probably the people of that time had massive factories creating many of these in one go, all the time. And many types of robots had different purposes. Of course, maintenance and more workhorse-like aspects, but we also know some of them were given more humanistic features, such as feelings and emotions. Doesn't that actually sound familiar? The fears of our jobs being replaced by technology. A good example that fits into all of this is AI. It is becoming more and more developed and certainly here to stay, but the things that AI can already do are quite astounding and even frightening. We also have examples of trying to make robots specifically more human-like. Look at Maria the robot, with whom there have been actual interviews. Reports say she does behave quite human-like. Of course, there have been some doubts about how much of that behavior is real and how much is pre-planned, but the idea stays the same. Technology is not just becoming a part of our daily life, but also becoming more like us. And could they perhaps replace us? It does look like the robots existed beyond the people who were in their area. Maybe that could be another explanation for why a lot of the architecture ended up being in the image of the robots. Perhaps they recreated things in their image because eventually this is all they knew. For a while they must have been self-sufficient enough to exist for a longer time, and since machine learning is a thing, they eventually could just learn things from themselves. But this fits in with another ancient robot species shown in Zelda games. Now, once again, a small Tears of the Kingdom spoiler here. So, in the beginning area, we learned from Rauru that the Zonai robots became so advanced that the people eventually began to learn from them. And they still continued doing their jobs for no one way into the future. It also sounds quite similar to the situation that we might have with the ancient robots. This actually gives me an idea. This came up while writing the script, but we know the Zonai descended to the land of Hyrule at some point. When exactly is not known, but could they have been in Hyrule before? Maybe they were that ancient civilization that created the technology. Seeing as some Zonai design patterns also remind of Mesoamerican culture, it actually doesn't seem that far off. Of course, nothing was mentioned of them in Skyward Sword, but that could be explained in two ways. They were there even before Hylian, but in their own godly forms. Or perhaps just the simple fact that the Zonai weren't a thing during development, and the fact that the robots were said to be created by an ancient civilization, but not any of the actual races that we know of, does hint at that there was more to the story. So that leaves us with two main ideas for what this ancient civilization before Hylians, or rather the modern Hylians, was. It could have been a form of Hylians or other types of humans. They could have lived in a highly advanced state like ours. Maybe there were huge towns and factories all over that eventually became limited through whatever reason. Maybe they were already on the decline by the time Hylia united the races, and so what we see was just repurposed by the races living under Hylia. For all we know, it could have been that this was our civilization, the one you and me are in. We met a self-caused apocalypse, perhaps even before Hylia, and left something behind for the others to use and repurpose. The other idea is that it was the Zonai. They were in Hyrule before, perhaps even continued existing off-screen throughout the events of Skyward Sword, and only much later after that the events related to Tears of the Kingdom occur. Both the Zonai technology and the technology surrounding the ancient robots revolve around being so advanced that they become self-sufficient for as long as they have power. Now, there are the Sheikah, and we do know about Sheikah technology, but it seems that this part, especially looking at Breath of the Wild, is something that came much later. One could wonder if they were the ones who built the ancient robots, if they have an affinity to it, but then again, why weren't they specifically mentioned as being behind it? Why keep it vague? I suppose we can't really know. After all this, maybe we can try to create a bit of a timeline for whatever might have happened. So Hyrule, and effectively the world, was created by the Golden Goddesses. In this universe, there is no sign that this could have been a purely scientific process, so we can assume that this is how it happened. We can also assume that there are other deities alongside them, such as Hylia, the Gerudo Sand Goddess, and more. But they probably did not create the world, although they do have their own roles related to it. Since then, we had different races living on Hyrule, and probably other places in the world. How they developed is not exactly clear. Perhaps they did see their own way of evolution, as we have seen examples of evolution in the series before, such as the Zora evolving into the Rito in Wind Waker, and of course the species changing their looks drastically. Some of the species seen in Skyward Sword, such as the Mogma and the Kikwi, do not appear again, so we can also imagine that maybe they evolved into something else. It is also theorized that the Parella or other sea species shown in-game are a primitive form of the Zora, but I digress. The point is, at some point we have several named and maybe some unnamed species, races, living together. We know Hylia united them at some point, but if that was from the start is unclear. It could be that in this long time there were even more races, going back to the ancient robots of course. We talked about humans, Hylians, Zonai. Something existed there. The fact that humans and Hylians do exist in the Zelda universe wouldn't make it seem far off that humans without pointy ears did exist then, which is why I continue mentioning them. But enough about races. This is where we are going back to one of the original topics of this video, the apocalypse. I've thrown in the idea that perhaps the ancient robots began to make things in their image after their creators had left. Could it be that perhaps their creators disappeared even before Demise appeared? A big advanced civilization, and somehow they ruined themselves? It would fit to the threat that our world is facing, mining until nothing is left, ruining the environment, aiding in climate change. All of that. Maybe Hylia had to unite the races because of that, because they ended up fighting each other over resources. Of course, it could also be that all this was abandoned when Demise appeared. All we know for sure is that the robots did fight alongside Hylia, so they were active then, even if their creators were not. When Link works with the time shift stones in Skyward Sword, we get a glimpse of how they were when they were active. But we don't actually know which era this is. Just that it is in the past, and that they don't seem to rely on humans then. The truth is though, that whatever destroyed these civilizations also kept them from evolving properly again. Now we circle back to the whole thing of Hyrule always being in a state of a pseudo-medieval society. Think of it. Demise caused this whole thing of the reincarnation of evil and the hero and the one carrying the blood of the goddess. That means evil will always return. So what happens? Ganon becomes a thing, and Ganon and I guess some other villains come and go. And it feels to me as if the development of Hyrule is somehow tied to that. And this is what the point of this topic is. Hyrule is a post-apocalyptic society. The advancement of old times was made useless because even in Skyward Sword you can mostly just revive technology through time travel. The apocalypse happened, and the world as it was in the times of Hylia was destroyed. And from then on, well, I wouldn't call the emergence of Ganon and others an apocalypse, but nonetheless we get new significant events in Hyrule that always hinder advancement. Now, they do happen more rarely, and there are always eras of peace in between where Hyrule could have advanced, but it still hardly happens. I suppose one could think about the actual phases of advancement before technology. Of course, a lot was found and researched in those times, but they couldn't really have invented big advanced machines, could they? What I'm saying is, Demise plunged the Hylians back into the Dark Ages, more or less. They might have had some leftovers from their advanced days, but nonetheless, almost all of it was lost. And while Hyrule is trying to continue and exist, there are always setbacks, sometimes smaller, sometimes bigger. It feels like the whole focus remains around the ancient ideals, because this is what Hyrule continues to have to deal with. It's good versus evil, God versus the devil. In a way, if we wish to compare this to Christianity even more, we could see it as having two forms of Jesus. We don't have a son of God, but rather, in a way, a daughter of the goddess, the reincarnation of Hylia. And we have the Messiah, the chosen hero, who, well, in my playthrough, he does die for my sins, but generally, hopefully he does not die for our sins, but still fights for us to exist. He still suffers for us. This is no longer just a theme, but a reality for Hyrule. And somehow it becomes an endless cycle, because every time we do see Hyrule advance, it somehow gets undone again. Another example being the ancient technology in Breath of the Wild. Well, it was not caused by Ganon, it was related to that, because the king of that time feared a shift in power, which led to the technology being hidden and nearly forgotten. Surprisingly, this does fit into the medieval theme of good versus evil. Advancement was feared because of the idea of it going against Christianity. Why accept modern medicine when you think someone is sick because of a demon? What if technology can risk the divine right to the crown that the royal family has had since Hylia's rebirth? That was another common theme, especially in Europe. Monarchs were not chosen, they were born, and had the divine right to reign, and it doesn't seem far off to assume that they'd feared being taken away from them. One could also talk about modern things being seen as witchcraft, but thankfully Hyrule is not that kind of place, since magic is very common. Of course, we did somewhat break out of the cycle after Wind Waker. Evil still existed, but Hyrule was fully gone, and suddenly we see advancement. We even get to the age of steam power. If we look at it from the outside, we see a contrast. Before Demise, the races of Hyrule were perhaps not perfect either, if we see how exhaustive mining was done, for example, but they were able to advance and exist peacefully. After Demise and the emergence of Hyrule as a kingdom, Hyrule became stuck in this pseudo-medieval state, wars and fights between good and evil. Demise was the apocalypse for an advanced civilization, for the people of Hylia, and the kingdom of Hyrule is made up of the scraps left behind from that time. And what came before the Hylians? The modern Hylians in specific, the ancient and more advanced Hylians, or any civilization that can be compared to it. May it be Zonai, or human, or who knows, aliens. But all their knowledge was effectively nearly wiped out, bringing Hyrule back to zero. Almost. Phew, that was something, wasn't it? I don't know how much sense all of this made outside of my mind, but I hope you enjoyed it. What do you think came before the modern Hylians and the Kingdom of Hyrule, even before any Hylians at all? I mean, other than the things that we 100% know of. Let me know below if you like. What else can I tell you? Oh yeah, I unfortunately cannot post videos that often as these take ages to make, and I have a ton of projects, but also work and studies and health stuff keeping me busy. But don't worry, I plan on continuing this channel and hopefully I can make it grow. I am grateful if you stick around and still come back to me even if I post more rarely. But if you do want to see more from me, you can follow me on Twitter at justapixelthing. It is quite chaotic, but I post all sorts of things. My pixel art, oddly specific rants, updates on videos and other projects such as music and writing and really anything I can think of. It is also linked on my channel alongside other social media of mine. Speaking of pixel art, the one used in this video was of course created by yours truly. But not only. Heard the vocalized version of the Ballad of the Goddess? That was also me singing it. Yes, I know, I sound vastly different when I sing. I am weird like that. I will link the full version below. But enough self-promo. It's time for me to wish you a nice day, week, year, lifetime, and I'll see you next time.